Katrina, Andrew, Camille, Galveston. These aren't just names on a weather map. They represent defining moments of disaster and resilience in American history. Today, we're looking back at 7 of the most powerful and destructive hurricanes ever to strike the U.S. And in this video, you will find out how many people died, what those who were lucky enough to survive had to go through, and most importantly, we will remember how politicians reacted. The Great Galveston Hurricane, still regarded as the deadliest natural disaster in United States history, the unnamed Category 4 hurricane that struck Galveston, Texas on September 8, 1900, remains a chilling testament to nature's power in an era before advanced warning systems. Galveston, then a booming port city built on a low-lying barrier island, was largely unprepared for the ferocity of the storm. Forecasters understood a storm was approaching, but its true intensity and track were underestimated, and many residents disregarded early warnings. The hurricane brought sustained winds estimated near 145 miles per hour, and most catastrophically, a storm surge exceeding 15 feet. This wall of water completely inundated the island city, whose highest point was less than 9 feet above sea level. Thousands of homes and buildings, primarily wooden structures, were simply obliterated, swept away or smashed into debris by the churning waves and winds. Entire city blocks vanished. Infrastructure like bridges connecting Galveston to the mainland were destroyed, isolating the survivors. The human toll was staggering and horrific. Estimates place the death toll between 6,000 and 12,000 people, with 8,000 being the most commonly cited figure. Thousands were killed in the initial surge and building collapses, while others drowned in the floodwaters that covered the island. In the aftermath, retrieving and identifying the dead was a grim, overwhelming task. The sheer scale of destruction was estimated at $20 to $30 million, equivalent to well over $700 million to over $1 billion today. News of the disaster spread slowly due to downed communication lines, but newspapers across the country eventually carried harrowing accounts and graphic images, shocking the nation. The government response was initially local, with survivors forming committees to manage relief and burial efforts. State and federal aid followed, along with immense charitable support funneled through organizations like the Red Cross, led by Clara Barton herself, who traveled to Galveston to assist. Celebrity involvement as understood today wasn't a factor, but prominent national figures expressed sympathy and encouraged donations. Politicians lauded the resilience of the survivors and debated the need for better warning systems, leading eventually to advancements in the U.S. Weather Bureau. The most significant long-term government response was a massive engineering project. Galveston built a 17-foot-high, 10-mile-long seawall and raised the elevation of much of the city, physically lifting remaining buildings, a monumental effort that protected the city from subsequent storms, though it never fully regained its former economic prominence relative to Houston. The Labor Day Hurricane. Holding the record for the most intense hurricane at U.S. landfall based on barometric pressure, 892 millibars, and estimated sustained winds, 185 miles per hour, the Labor Day hurricane of 1935 was a compact but incredibly violent Category 5 storm. It slammed into the Florida Keys, particularly Upper Matecumbe Key and Long Key, on the evening of September 2nd. The affected area was relatively remote, but tragically housed hundreds of World War I veterans working on a federal government project to build the overseas highway. These men lived in flimsy work camps directly in the storm's path. The storm surge, estimated at 18 to 20 feet, coupled with the extreme winds, completely devastated the low-lying keys. Buildings were annihilated, and the tracks of the Florida East Coast Railway, the only land link to the mainland, were washed away, twisting steel rails like spaghetti. The veterans' work camps disintegrated. A rescue train sent from Miami was delayed and ultimately derailed by the surge and wind near Islamorada, too late to evacuate most of the workers. The death toll is estimated at 408, though some believe it was higher. This included approximately 260 veterans, along with local residents. The combination of wind and water pressure was so extreme, it reportedly sandblasted paint off vehicles. Damage was estimated around $6 million in 1935 dollars, over $130 million today, primarily concentrated in the destruction of the railway and infrastructure in the upper and middle Keys. News coverage highlighted the plight of the veterans, leading to national outrage. Politicians and newspapers heavily criticized the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, FERA, and project managers for failing to ensure the safety and timely evacuation of the workers despite storm warnings. There were congressional investigations into the government's responsibility for the veterans' deaths. President Franklin D. Roosevelt ordered a full inquiry. While celebrity involvement wasn't a major factor in direct relief, figures like Ernest Hemingway, who lived in Key West and later visited the devastation, documented the storm's impact. The government's response involved immediate search and rescue recovery efforts by the Coast Guard and military, followed by aid distribution. The long-term consequence was the abandonment of the railway. The government ultimately converted the remaining railway bridges and built new sections to complete the overseas highway, which remains the critical artery through the Keys today. The disaster underscored the vulnerability of the Keys and led to improvements in hurricane monitoring and warning dissemination, though the tragic loss of the veterans remained a political controversy. Hurricane Camille. Hurricane Camille was one of only 4 Category 5 hurricanes known to have made landfall in the continental U.S. At the time, Michael later became the 4th. Roaring ashore near Waveland, Mississippi, on the night of August 17, 1969, Camille brought sustained winds estimated at 175 miles per hour, though potentially higher as measuring equipment was destroyed, and a record-breaking storm surge officially measured at 24.6 feet in Pass Christian, Mississippi. The devastation along the Mississippi Gulf Coast was catastrophic and near total. Coastal towns like Waveland, Pass Christian, Long Beach, and Gulfport suffered obliteration of buildings near the shore. Sturdy multi-story structures were reduced to slabs. Ships were tossed inland like toys, and the landscape was scoured clean. The Richelieu Manor apartments in Pass Christian became infamous due to a hurricane party where, according to disputed survivor accounts, residents ignored evacuation orders. The building collapsed, killing most inside. Further inland, Camille maintained intensity longer than expected. After weakening over land, its remnants interacted with a frontal system and dumped torrential rainfall, up to 27 inches, over the Appalachian Mountains, primarily in Virginia. This caused catastrophic flash flooding and landslides, particularly in Nelson County, Virginia, adding significantly to the death toll days after landfall. The total number of fatalities from Camille was 259 on the Gulf Coast and 116 in the Virginia floods. Damage was estimated at $1.42 billion in 1969 dollars, equivalent to over $11 billion today, making it one of the costliest U.S. hurricanes at the time. News coverage featured shocking aerial footage of the flattened Mississippi coastline and dramatic reports from the Virginia floods. Media widely reported the likely embellished hurricane party story, which became part of storm lore. President Richard Nixon visited the devastated Gulf Coast, declaring it a major disaster area. The federal response involved FEMA's predecessor agencies, the military, deploying thousands of troops for cleanup and security, and significant aid packages. Political discussion focused on the need for better evacuation compliance and building codes. Celebrity involvement included performers like Bob Hope organizing benefits, and numerous donations were made, though perhaps less centralized than in modern events. Camille's sheer intensity and the unexpected inland flooding served as stark reminders of hurricane dangers, influencing forecasting, emergency management, emphasizing inland flood threats from remnants, and spurring research into hurricane dynamics. The Mississippi coast took decades to fully recover, forever scarred by Camille's passage. Hurricane Andrew. Hurricane Andrew was a compact but ferocious Category 5 storm that struck South Florida, specifically southern Dade County, now Miami-Dade County, on August 24, 1992, before making a second landfall as a Category 3 storm in Louisiana. Andrew's sustained winds at Florida landfall were 165 miles per hour, with gusts exceeding that. While not particularly large, its core contained some of the most violent winds imaginable. The devastation in areas like Homestead, Florida City, and Cutler Ridge was apocalyptic. Entire neighborhoods were flattened, leaving only foundations behind. Over 25,000 homes were destroyed, and more than 100,000 were damaged. Mobile home parks were completely obliterated. The intensity of the winds shredded structures in ways rarely seen before, peeling roofs off, collapsing concrete block walls, and tossing vehicles and boats. Homestead Air Force Base was devastated. The Florida power and light infrastructure suffered immense damage, leaving millions without electricity for extended periods in the summer heat. While the storm surge was significant, wind was the primary destructive force in Florida. Andrew directly caused 26 deaths in the U.S., with several dozen more indirect deaths attributed to the storm's aftermath, e.g., accidents during cleanup, health issues from lack of power. Damage was estimated at $27.3 billion in 1992 dollars, over $56 billion today, making it the costliest natural disaster in U.S. history at that time. The initial government response, particularly from FEMA, was widely criticized as slow, inadequate, and poorly coordinated, leaving many victims without essential food, water, and shelter for days. News media broadcast images of the utter devastation and frustrated residents, with headlines like, "Where's the cavalry?" This intense criticism led to major reforms within FEMA under Director James Lee Witt during the Clinton administration. President George Herbert Walker Bush visited the area and ordered a massive federal mobilization, including thousands of troops for security, logistics, and aid distribution. Politicians debated disaster response effectiveness and building code enforcement. The disaster revealed widespread shoddy construction and inadequate enforcement of existing building codes in South Florida, leading to significant overhauls and the creation of the much stricter Florida Building Code. Celebrity involvement was substantial, with South Florida resident Gloria Estefan organizing benefit concerts, hurricane relief concert, and telethons featuring major stars to raise millions. Miami Heat basketball players and other local celebrities assisted in relief efforts. Andrew's legacy includes dramatically improved building codes in hurricane-prone areas and a reformed FEMA, though challenges would resurface later, serving as a benchmark for intense hurricane impacts. Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina stands as one of the most devastating and costly natural disasters in U.S. history, leaving a deep scar on the nation, particularly New Orleans. Making landfall first in Florida as a Category 1, Katrina intensified rapidly over the Gulf of Mexico before striking the northern Gulf Coast as a powerful Category 3 hurricane on August 29, 2005. While its winds were destructive along the Mississippi coast, causing Camille-like devastation in towns like Waveland and Biloxi, with a massive storm surge exceeding 27 feet, the catastrophe in New Orleans was primarily due to catastrophic failures of the federally built levee and floodwall system. The storm surge overwhelmed and breached multiple levees and floodwalls, causing roughly 80% of New Orleans and significant portions of neighboring parishes to flood. Many residents, particularly the poor, elderly, and those without transportation, were unable to evacuate and became trapped by the rising waters. The scenes were horrific. People stranded on rooftops, bodies floating in streets, thousands taking refuge in squalid conditions at the Superdome and Convention Center without adequate food, water, or sanitation. The official death toll is estimated at 1,836, the vast majority in Louisiana due to flooding. Katrina caused an estimated $125 billion in damages, $2005 over $190 billion today, making it the costliest U.S. hurricane on record. The government response from local and state levels up to the federal government, especially FEMA and President George W. Bush, was widely condemned as tragically slow, inept, and disorganized. Communication failures, bureaucratic delays, and lack of preparedness hampered rescue and relief efforts for days, leaving countless victims stranded. News media provided continuous, often harrowing live coverage, broadcasting the desperation of survivors and questioning the government response. Images of the flooded city, the Superdome conditions, and criticisms of officials dominated headlines worldwide. Politicians initially offered assurances but faced intense backlash. FEMA Director Michael Brown resigned amid the criticism, "Heck of a job, Brownie." Congressional hearings followed, investigating the levee failures, finding design and construction flaws by the Army Corps of Engineers, and the inadequate disaster response. Celebrity involvement was massive. New Orleans native musicians like Wynton Marsalis and Harry Connick Jr. were heavily involved. A major telethon, Shelter from the Storm, a concert for the Gulf Coast, featured numerous A-list stars and raised millions. Brad Pitt founded the Make It Right Foundation to build sustainable homes in the lower Ninth Ward. Kanye West famously stated, "George Bush doesn't care about black people," during a relief concert, highlighting racial and class disparities in the disaster's impact and response. Katrina exposed deep issues of race, poverty, infrastructure failure, and government incompetence, leading to levee system reconstruction, ongoing debates about coastal restoration, and lasting demographic changes in New Orleans. Hurricane Sandy. While technically weakening below hurricane intensity just before its final landfall, Hurricane Sandy, dubbed Superstorm Sandy, remains one of the most impactful storms due to its immense size and unusual track, striking the densely populated U.S. Northeast. Originating in the Caribbean, Sandy moved north and then took an unprecedented sharp left turn towards the New Jersey coast, making landfall near Brigantine on October 29, 2012. Its hurricane-force winds extended hundreds of miles from the center, and its massive circulation combined with high tides during a full moon generated a devastating storm surge across the New Jersey and New York coastlines. Coastal New Jersey towns suffered severe damage from surge and waves, destroying homes, businesses, and iconic boardwalks. In New York City, the surge flooded large parts of Lower Manhattan, Staten Island, Brooklyn, and Queens. Subway tunnels were inundated with saltwater, crippling the transit system. Power outages affected millions across multiple states, some lasting for weeks in cold weather. Breezy Point, Queens, suffered both flooding and a massive fire that destroyed over 100 homes. The storm caused 147 direct deaths in the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean, 72 in the U.S., with many related to falling trees, electrocution, and exposure hypothermia due to power outages. Damage estimates reached approximately $70 billion, 2012 dollars over $90 billion today, making it the second costliest U.S. storm after Katrina at the time. The government response involved massive mobilization across multiple states. President Barack Obama visited affected areas, working closely with governors like Chris Christie of New Jersey and Andrew Cuomo of New York. FEMA coordinated extensive relief efforts, providing aid, shelter, and debris removal support. The storm sparked renewed political debate about climate change and its role in extreme weather, as well as the need for infrastructure resilience in coastal cities. Congress eventually passed a large disaster relief bill after some political wrangling. Media coverage was extensive, showing dramatic images of coastal destruction, flooded NYC subway stations, and the Breezy Point fire. Celebrity involvement was significant, especially focused on New York and New Jersey recovery. Bruce Springsteen, Bon Jovi, Billy Joel, and others participated in the 12-12-12, the concert for Sandy relief at Madison Square Garden, raising millions. Numerous other celebrities donated or participated in local relief efforts. Sandy highlighted the vulnerability of the Northeast's critical infrastructure to storm surge and spurred major investments and planning efforts regarding coastal defenses and climate adaptation in the region. Hurricane Maria. Hurricane Maria struck the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico on September 20th, 2017, as a high-end Category 4 storm, just 2 weeks after Hurricane Irma had skirted the island. Maria was the strongest hurricane to make landfall in Puerto Rico since 1928, crossing the island diagonally with devastating sustained winds near 155 miles per hour. The impact was catastrophic and island-wide. Maria decimated Puerto Rico's already fragile infrastructure. The electrical grid was completely destroyed, plunging the entire island of 3.4 million residents into darkness, with full restoration taking nearly a year for some areas, the largest blackout in U.S. history. Cell phone service collapsed. Roads were blocked by landslides and debris, isolating communities. Homes, especially wooden ones in rural areas, were shredded or lost their roofs. Agriculture was devastated. Access to clean water, food, medicine, and fuel became critical issues across the island. The initial official death toll reported by the Puerto Rican government was 64. However, this figure was widely disputed amidst reports of overwhelmed morgues and difficulties in counting deaths, especially indirect ones caused by lack of power, medical care, or clean water. Subsequent investigations and academic studies, including one commissioned by the Puerto Rican government itself from George Washington University, estimated the excess mortality attributable to the storm and its aftermath to be closer to 2,975, making Maria one of the deadliest U.S. hurricanes in a century. Damage was estimated at $90 billion, 2017 dollars, over $110 billion today. The government response, particularly the federal response led by FEMA in the Trump administration, faced severe criticism. While aid was sent, logistical challenges, damaged infrastructure, and bureaucratic hurdles hampered distribution. Critics pointed to a slower and less robust response compared to mainland disasters like Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, which occurred around the same time. President Donald Trump's visit, during which he tossed paper towels to a crowd and downplayed the death toll, became a symbol of perceived indifference for many critics. Political debate raged over the adequacy of the aid package, Puerto Rico's territorial status and its impact on recovery, and the handling of mortality statistics. News coverage highlighted the dire conditions, the blackout, the struggles of residents, and the controversies surrounding the response and death toll. Celebrities, particularly those of Puerto Rican descent like Jennifer Lopez, Mark Anthony, Lin-Manuel Miranda, and Ricky Martin, were heavily involved in raising funds and awareness. Miranda created the charity single, Almost Like Praying. Numerous others donated millions and organized supply drives. Maria exposed deep vulnerabilities in Puerto Rico's infrastructure and highlighted ongoing challenges related to its political status and economic struggles, with recovery efforts continuing years later.